welcome to Amrita by the Book. My name is Amrita. This is my booktube, and today I'm delighted to be discussing one of my favorite books that I read last year, and it's truly exceptional follow-up this year. I'm talking, of course, about a memoir called Empire that was published last year, or maybe 2019. What is time? Who knows? But that was the first book in the duology, and then this year in March we'll see a Desolation called Peace. Now, I was lucky to be given an advanced review copy by the publisher and by NetGalley, and I am so delighted that I got to read this when I did, because I'd been looking forward to this ever since I finished the first book last year. And you guys, like, even with the weight of all my expectations, this book is fantastic. I love this book so much that I was telling people how I had to slow down because I was reading it too fast. Like, I couldn't stop myself from just devouring it, and I had to remind myself, no, savor it. I didn't want to get to the end, but also I couldn't wait to get to the end. It was one of those books. I loved it. Now, this is a spoiler-free review, mainly because I don't think it's necessary for me to discuss spoilers. Like, sometimes you can't really talk about a book or a series in depth unless you give certain spoilers. I don't think that's necessary in terms of these two books, because everything that I'm going to be talking about are plot points that are part of the blurb. So I'm not giving anything away, but I will be discussing the themes that are present in this book. So if that's something that bothers you, then you should go away. You should definitely pick up these two books, read it, come back, and then we can have a discussion. But for other people who don't mind talking about themes and don't consider that to be spoilers, let's talk about this series. So the reason that I'm talking about the two books together is because it's really impossible for me to discuss one without the other. This is a true duology, which is pretty rare, as I've said before. Like, a lot of people use duologies to talk about like two separate stories, but this is one of those where they are a perfect whole. Like, the first book interlocks into the second book. Like, if you didn't read the first book, the second book wouldn't have the impact that it does, and you wouldn't understand a lot of the history and the impetus behind the actions of several of the characters. So you really do need to read the first book to get the background, and then in the second book we move to the action. And that's how it's written. In the first book we see the ambassador of this tiny space station who goes into the heart of this neighboring empire, and she just has one brief, which is to make sure that her little space station stays outside of the empire, because the empire is always hungry for more, and the only way that this space station has survived for as long as it has is by just feeding it enough to keep it interested but away, and by convincing them that they really don't have anything to like drive the empire to colonize them, because that would be more bother than they're worth. And then this person, her name is Mahith, arrives at the heart of the empire. The jewel of the world is what they call their central city. And it is a completely different world to anything that either you or I or she has experienced. And what we see is basically not just a fish out of water experience, and also, she's there to investigate the suspicious death of a predecessor. So there's a murder mystery hanging over the whole thing as well. But also it's this fascinating look at somebody on the fringes of empire interacting with the heart of the empire, and then having this inner struggle about the aspirations of colonialism. Because that's something that I think a lot of books about colonization miss. They focus upon things like resources and about violence, and all of these things are true. You cannot have colonization without violence, and it is a physical violence. But there is another kind of violence that is cultural and mental and emotional, and that is what this book really focuses on, and it is fascinating. Mahith understands that, it is a bad thing for the empire to want to take over her space station, and that her duty lies with the space station and to ensure that they remain free of the clutches of the empire. But because she has spent her entire life studying to be an ambassador to these people, she's also intimately acquainted with their culture. And the thing is, that is how colonization works. Like, it doesn't just take over territory, like physical territory, it takes over mental and emotional territory. So for me, for instance, as an Indian, when I was reading it, it really resonated with me, because in India, for a very long time, like starting in the early 19th century, the British had a very specific stated aim of turning Indians into brown Englishmen, albeit inferior Englishmen, because they just couldn't be bothered dealing with the complexities of India, and they thought that it would be easier to just turn Indians into Englishmen rather than Englishmen spending all their time trying to learn how to be Indian. That's how the colonizing mind works. And this isn't even an India-specific solution that they came up with. This was something that they came up for the Irish, and that they put to great effect in Scotland and Wales as well. Which is why if you speak to an Irish person, I think the Irish are probably the maddest about it, but the Scottish and the Welsh also have their very strong opinions about it. But there is a process of cultural assimilation and holding up the central culture of the empire or the colonizer as aspirational, and then sort of taunting or even challenging the colonized to measure up to the standards of the colonizer. And that is what Mahit goes through the entirety of the first book, because she is in this culture that she has loved and she has studied and she is fluent in, but she is forever the other. And she is reminded of that all the time by all the people that she meets. That no matter how fluent she might be in their culture, it is still their culture, not hers. It's this mental jiu-jitsu that is designed to keep people in their place. Now, at the end of the first book, what happens is that Mahit is just sort of desperately tap dancing to make sure that A, she can keep her station safe, B, she can solve the murder of a predecessor, and C, that she doesn't lose her own self and her own identity because she's been seduced by this culture that she loves. And she has to admit to herself that she does love this culture, even though she fears it. And it's honestly such a complex portrayal. But the way that she manages to bring everything to a close is by pointing the empire's attention away from her station and towards this looming threat on the fringes of their empire. And that is this other enemy that seems intent upon invading the empire's territory, and they don't know anything about it except that they are lethal. So that's why we leave things at the end of the first book. Now we switch to the second book, which, I don't know, like I keep thinking of it as Star Wars meets Ready Player One, but with like deeper philosophical pinnings. Like in feel, it is a completely different novel from the first one. The first one was a murder mystery, it was a fish out of water story, it was about this person trying to come to terms with themselves. Like it was a very interior kind of novel. And then in this one, it's just action, action, action. And it starts with the audience or the reader being introduced to the mind of the enemy. And I won't tell you what that is, but it is fantastic. Like I read that first interlude and I was absolutely sold. Like my eyes just dilated because I was just like, this is insanely great. So now there is a problem between these two empires, right? Like they need to find a way to talk to each other, but they are not just culturally divergent, they are absolutely different from each other. Like everything about them is absolutely foreign to each other. They don't know even how to talk to each other or what the other person looks like. So they get Mahit and this other person called Three Seagrass, who was her minder in the previous novel and is now working for the Ministry of Information. And they get the two of them to come out to the frontier where, they've been having these skirmishes, and they want them to facilitate a first contact meeting. So now the story has 3 tracks. There is one that is happening in the heart of the empire, back in the Jewel of the Crown, where there is palace intrigue, there is politics, there's all these things that are happening in terms of the empire. Then there is Mahit and Seagrass, who have a relationship between them, but also they're trying to figure out how to talk to these aliens. And also Mahit has this whole other story about, what is happening on her station and how her station is slowly trying to pull more deeper into isolationism and how that impacts her and her culture. And then the third track is the war itself, because these two people are fighting and there are all these imperatives at play. So obviously there's tons of action going on, it's all very like pew, pew, pew. But even in the middle of all this, Martine pulls off this incredible feat in that when we start the novel, we are looking at these two cultures that are completely different, and it starts with a meditation on language, and language being culture, language being ideas. I've spoken about this before, and Martine just really leans into that. And then as the story progresses, even though we don't really know what is happening on the other end, like what is happening in the home world of the aliens, when we start comparing the actions and the ideas and the impulses of the people that we do know of what is happening in the empire, and we start comparing them to the actions of the aliens and the few glimpses that we get of what the aliens are thinking, we begin to see that the two of them are really not that different. They're really just two sides of a mirror. They're both jockeying for the same things. They are both reacting in the same ways. It is just that they are so divergent in terms of being that it looks very different when it is received on the other end. But otherwise, they have so much in common. And that is both terrifying and it is exhilarating, because you see how common some things can be and how easy it is to misunderstand and actually not to understand at all. Two of the other themes that we see running throughout both these books, but explored in very different ways. The first is the importance of memory. So in the first book, Mahit is in search for her predecessor's memory, and that makes sense within the plot of the novel. And then in the second book, we see the different ways that the aliens process memory. We are talking about institutional memory, we are talking about individual memory, and we are seeing how all three of them intersect and interplay in various situations, and it is fascinating. And then there is this thread that runs through both books, and it becomes more and more clear as we go through the first book, and it becomes text from subtext in the second book, which is what constitutes a person. What do we mean when we say that this is a person? And we see Mahit struggle with that, with being a barbarian, so to speak, and how that colors her relationship with not just the people in the empire that she's working with, but also the people back home, and how they view her because of her affinity towards the empire. And then on a larger scale, we have this dialogue between these two cultures, between these two empires, about what is a person, and because they have very different ideas of personhood, and that is one of their cultural differences. It is intense and it blew my mind so many times, and I loved it like a crazy person. Each of the characters in these books, like, you see some of them in the first book, and not all of them make it into the second book, but the ones that do and the new ones that are introduced, they each contribute so much to the arc of the story. I don't think there's a single character, even the character of this child, and that child is just heartbreaking, but it's also like a total badass, and I really like this child. I don't always like children in my media, but this kid was amazing. And they each contribute so much to this complicated fabric that is being woven. It is great, and it also sets up all these relationships between these characters, and it keeps asking the question, what is love? Because this is not a novel in which people say like, oh, I love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not what this novel is. But this is a novel that routinely stops people in their tracks and asks them, what does love mean to them? Is it loyalty? Is it fetishization? Is it sacrifice? Is it innovation? What is it? And sooner or later, each person in the cast has to answer that question for themselves. And every single time, it blew my mind. This book really combines the meditative and philosophical feel of classic science fiction with the more pulsating action feel of mainstream fare. The first book is really kind of not slow. I wouldn't say it's slow, but it really does set the stage, and you're not aware of that until you really launch into the second book, because the second book just takes off. And I was trying to think about who I would recommend this to, and I think perhaps I might recommend this to a wide variety of people, because there are some books that really just work for a very specific audience, but I feel like this is a book that would work for people who like literature. Like, if you like literary fiction, then this is a duology that would really work for you. And then if you love science fiction, this is definitely a duology that should work for you. But this is definitely a series that is meant for people who like to think and who like to put in the work. Not in terms of prose, like the prose is very easy, but in terms of concept, in terms of world building, in terms of what the book is trying to say. So it really does occupy your brain, and I don't think I finished feeling it all out, and I don't think I will for a while yet. I think I'm going to think about this for years to come. I'm going to reread this, and I'm going to enjoy every single bit of it, and I'm going to recommend this book for years to come. So if you're in the market for a new science fiction read, if you've never read a science fiction book but you're thinking that you might want to, then this is the series for you. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.